How can we begin to move towards a society where there is zero suicide? What sort of conversations should we be having, both with those we love or those that we work with if we work in mental health? These are all the questions that we are going to be discussing in today's episode and more. I am chatting with Steve Phillip, father of Jordan and the founder of the Jordan Legacy, and everything that we can do as a community, as a movement, as an organisation, as a country to begin to move towards zero suicide. I hope you find it so useful. Hi, welcome along to the Aspiring Psychologist podcast. I am Dr. Marianne Trent, a qualified clinical psychologist. Today, I know that if you're watching on YouTube, I do look like I have been in the wars a little bit. And if you're listening and you don't know what I'm on about, I have got a large white patch on my face because I had a mole removed this week, and they've told me I've got to keep this on for 7 whole days, which wasn't something that I was really planning on. I just thought I'd have some small stitches and that would be quite discreet and nobody would notice, but that is not the way. Reminds me of when I broke my arm last year and then we had the poorly wing series. Now we will have the which stage of Marianne's mole treatment are we at? But today is such an important conversation. This episode is launching as close to World Suicide Prevention Day as possible. But this is not just a conversation for September. You may be discovering this months, perhaps even years later. It's an incredibly powerful episode, of course, because we are talking about suicide. This might feel triggering, so please do look after yourself. And if you are listening around young ears, perhaps wear headphones or consider popping back later. And I will look forward to catching up with you after this chat with Steve Phillip. Hi, welcome along to the podcast, Steve.
Hi, Marianne. Really good to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, well, I feel so honoured that you've agreed. I feel like I've followed you and your work for as long as I've been kind of on socials, really. So I can't really imagine a time on LinkedIn when you weren't in it. And so I feel really honoured and privileged that you're affording us your time.
No, thank you. And LinkedIn is a platform I'm very familiar with because it was my career before losing my son Jordan. I taught organizations about how to use the platform and other social media. So it's somewhere that people have known me for many years, but in two very different stories, really.
Absolutely. Well, that partly explains why you are so engaging on LinkedIn and why you've developed the following you have. But of course, it's the very poignant and powerful content that you are discussing, which really is scroll stopping for all the right reasons. Could you tell us a little bit about your son Jordan, please, Steve?
Yes, well, the story or the second story, as you were, Marion, started on December the 4th of 2019 when Jordan, who was 34 at the time, took his own life. Something that none of us had expected, despite the fact that he was diagnosed 4.5 years prior to that with clinical anxiety and depression. I think it's fair to say that most of us who knew Jordan were uneducated about the risks involved. So when it did happen, it was a complete shock. For context, Jordan's story is not that dissimilar to many others that I've heard. Say he was 34 at the time. He had his own house just outside Leeds. He had a successful career as an officer with the Independent Office for Police Conduct, the IOPC. Quite a stressful job, but managing it well, very well thought of. He had a lovely relationship with his partner, Charlotte. A loving family, despite his mother and I having separated and divorced back in 2005. We've kept a very close relationship. She's best friends with Jordan's stepmom, which is a wonderful thing to see. My 87-year-old mother finds it a little weird when the three of us are sitting on a sofa together, but she's from a different generation, maybe. But he was a lad described by his friends as the guy who would light up the room when he walked into it. He was over 6 feet tall, a good-looking lad by most people's estimation. His dance moves, apparently, at weddings and events were legendary. And on many a night out, his friends would look round to see where Jordan was, only to find him in the middle of Lee's kneeling down talking to a busker or a homeless person, and Jordan was very much one for the underdog. If he had a friend or a pal that was in trouble, he was probably the first of the group to jump in his car and drive a few hundred miles to be there to support them. And that was very much how Jordan was described to me, really, after his death, because when you have a child, you know that child until they leave home. And then there's parts of that person's life that you just don't know about, partially because they keep that very private from their parents and family, and partially because they're living a whole different life and existence outside of that direct family circle. But yeah, a lad that I think most parents would be very proud to call their son.
It's certainly that shines out of you and the content that you create, really. Just what a lovely, kind person he was, and I feel like I know him despite the fact that obviously I've never had a chance to actually meet him. And the other day I was on holiday in Greece, and in the resort with someone, and I thought, "Oh, it's Jordan," like, because someone looked so like him. And I'm sure you've had moments like that yourself over the years as well, where someone's similar posture and size and
Oh,
mannerisms.
it was only a few months ago. We took a holiday at the end of December, actually, and went to Tenerife, a spot we know well there, just to take a short break before Christmas. And on a table next to us were some young people, and I remember taking a very sneaky sort of sideways photograph, as I said to my wife, look how much that lad kind of looks like Jordan, and shared it with the family, and
Mm,
there was a similarity. But yeah, moments like that kind of stop you in your tracks, really.
they do, and for a moment you can kind of imagine or just enjoy seeing them. I think this is the power of video content as well, isn't it? That you can see them alive and well, and yeah, sort of you kind of it's a mixed, poignant emotions, isn't it? So, bittersweet happiness.
Oh yeah, definitely. Just before we came on air, you talked about the fact that, say, Jordan's stepmom and I married 10 years ago this month, and as part of that day, we treated ourselves to a spa day locally, but we pulled out the wedding video that was really nicely produced by somebody locally for us. But of course, as we sat there and watched it, there was Jordan delivering his little poem, and nervous as heck delivering it, and other moments where we could see him during the video. So we both said it was a real roller coaster. Such a happy day, and yet on
Mm.
reflection, now you look back and go, wow, there's all that potential still there. 10 years ago.
Absolutely. I'm pleased you've got those memories and that you've got them to be able to look back on, but I wish it had a different outcome. And the audience for this video and this podcast episode will be varied, actually. We may have people listening or watching because they've recently been affected by suicide, or because they're starting to worry about themselves or someone they care about. The question that we often might ask in a mental health service, along the lines of, are you having thoughts that life might not be worth living? Or have you had any thoughts about ending your own life, or planning or preparing for that? And sometimes a parent will become aware of that answer before a service will, and it's how to manage that. But some other audience will be people working in mental health services who'll be having these clients in the room with them, or their referrals on their desk almost as we speak, as they're listening to this. And it's a big deal, and we want to get it right for everybody that's listening and everybody that's watching and everyone that comes into contact with these people. It's a really, really big but important job, isn't it? So I guess if we first speak to, what the heck do we do if we find ourselves in this position? How can we try not to scare people away? And that would be the same as a parent or someone working in a service. How can we have this powerful impact?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Marion. And we hear the word normalize used a lot. How do we normalize the conversation around mental health? How do we normalize the conversation around suicide? But because it is so prevalent, because it impacts so many people in this country alone, over 800,000 people every year are going to be impacted by a suicide death. So we need to recognize the scale of the issue, and we need to become more comfortable in talking about a subject that's been extremely taboo. If you had a child or someone you loved who'd gone out on a motorbike, for example, and they've been riding it too fast, they came off and had an accident, but fortunately got away reasonably unscathed. You'd be, even before that, you'd be having a conversation with them, wouldn't you, about, just be careful out there. These are the risks. You wouldn't think twice about doing it. But when it comes to suicide, we just find it very difficult to have that conversation. So in some way, we have to become better at that, and I think that becomes more of a hope if we as a society become a much better educated society around suicide, and these conversations are taking place in our workplaces, our schools, in our public health departments, and in our communities.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's kind of evoking memories of when I worked in a CAMS service, which is, for anyone who's not sure, it's a service for children and adolescents with mental health difficulties. And as part of that, there'll be close working with families. And sometimes a parent would be realizing that their child is self-harming and then naturally sort of jump to the conclusion that that means that they're suicidal. And to that, I would say not always. Sometimes people will engage in acts of self-harm but never become suicidal. And so the two are separate. But of course, what we know is it's possible for people to engage in no self-harm but be suicidal or actually end their own life. And it's a lot, isn't it?
It is, and I think if we look at, again, young people in particular, what are the risks involved? Things have changed, particularly from my day as a young person. I think the societal pressures on young people are far more multifaceted and extreme than we ever experienced. The worst case scenario for us was our parents were probably worried if we'd fall out of a tree because we were climbing it. But we've got peer pressure at a level we've never seen before. A lot of that through online social media comparisons and influencers out there at the moment. We've got standards within schools that are having a knock-on effect not only to teaching staff but to the pupils as well. It seems to be almost now from preschool there's a standard you've got to meet as a young person, or an examination you've got to go through. We're in a world that many are considering is unstable in many respects from a climate point of view, and some of the conflicts we're seeing around the world. So with the many reasons why young people in particular are feeling confused, displaced, and fearful for the future. And if we know and understand that, although there are many reasons why someone might go down the path of attempting suicide, two things usually create that situation. One is a sense that that person is trapped in some way. That can be in a relationship, or in financial difficulties, or through addictions, or whatever it might be, which ultimately leads to a sense of hopelessness. And if that person feels hopeless about the future in any way, then that's the point where they've now potentially become at risk of considering suicide.
So yeah, hope. I was really thinking about the time frame of Jordan's death at the latter end of 2019, and of course, what we know came next was the pandemic. And I'm kind of struck by the fact that I'm remembering that Caroline Flack ended her own life in February, Valentine's Day, wasn't it, 2020? But what we know with hindsight is that just a couple of weeks after that, everything seemed to stop mattering, and the kind of
Mm.
context of the entire world shifted. And nobody could have known what was going to happen with the pandemic, but it may have made such a difference to so many people in terms of everything shifting online, people staying home, the pressures being different. People may have been furloughed. People are not, shame almost would have been excised from so many situations and guilt and responsibility and shoulds and I musts. And that's the variable that we can't account for, and we can't turn back time. Nobody could have known that was going to happen. But I find myself as a professional dwelling on that because so many people did seem to begin to thrive on the other side of the pandemic, where actually they'd shifted to working from home or remotely, or they'd seen that actually nothing happens if they don't go to work every day, and they are happier. And actually, when they include exercise and they've got more time to eat and they're not spending an hour each way commuting, they're able to spend time with their family and their loved ones. And it's less depleting and more enjoyable, and kind of it reminded so many of us about the important factors for life, I
Yeah,
think.
I think that's a really important point to make, Marion, for a number of reasons. So, I think back to those initial weeks and days and weeks following Jordan's suicide. Where was I in that moment? I was in a place where nothing mattered really at all. We talked offline again about the fact that my work with the Jordan Legacy is full time, and I immediately stepped back from my career in consultancy because that didn't matter. Nothing in previous to Jordan's death would have ever made me make that kind of decision. Yeah, I mean, literally nothing really kind of mattered. Nothing could have hurt me. Nothing could have harmed me. Nothing could be worse than what had happened. And I know so many other people bereaved by suicide, have said they felt the same way. And then, as you say, we all moved into COVID at that period of time. And I think there were many who, and we saw the tweets, we saw the comments on social media suggesting that suicides were increasing rapidly as a result of the COVID pandemic. We know that it wasn't factual, unusually for X and Twitter. We know, in fact, there was a slight decrease of 5% in suicides during that period. And there's a theory and a belief out there that we changed our attitudes during that period of time. That we did, as you say, started to realize that actually lots of things we did worry about before were maybe not as critical. But we also, as a community and a society, came together. We started looking out for each other. We started doing shopping for our neighbors and checking in with them and family to see if they were okay. We did all these things, which we should be still doing. But as is the human race, we've kind of reverted back to type in many cases. Some haven't. Of course, they've continued on. But it proved that as a society, we can be kinder, we can be more supportive of one another. And as a result of that, more people can thrive as a result. So I think it's a really important point you make.
I think we're definitely stronger together. Like, I love people. I love conversations in Tesco about cauliflowers with random people. Like, I really, I really like connecting with people. And I think when we were all masked up, and in many ways we were being more community driven, but we were having to be physically distanced from people. That, I think, that was trickier. So this is, it wasn't all hearts and flowers during the pandemic, especially for someone in a domestically violent relationship where they're suddenly in a lockdown situation with that partner, or, actually what we also recognized during lockdown was that so many of us, we have our 3 soothing systems. I don't know if you've done these 3 systems. It's a compassion and focus therapy idea. So you've got your drive, your threat, and your soothe system. So many of us had our soothe system activated outside of the house. So it might have been cinema trips, it might have been meals with parents, it might have been, catching up with friends at the pub, or it might have been cinema, it might have been, I've said cinema twice, go twice in a week's fine. It might have been gym going, it might have been something outside of your home that kept you really well. And then when all that went off limits, it was almost like, how do I begin to soothe myself? Which is why there was kind of suddenly loads more kind of downloads of mindfulness apps, and the podcasting went through the roof. Don't know if you were part of the Clubhouse generation, but Clubhouse was like just exploded because everyone was home and listening to that. And so really encouraged us to think about how we soothe ourselves and how we keep ourselves well. And obviously, a part of this time, you were thinking about this needs to be different, this needs to matter, there needs to be a purpose. And so you began to think about Jordan Legacy coming to fruition. And obviously that's happened. Could you tell us a little bit about the project, the company, and what your aims are?
Yeah, it was an interesting time because, like many people bereaved by suicide, your instant reaction once the dust has settled, so to speak, is right. What do I do now with my life? And I think because I was so uneducated about this subject and started to realise that many other people were as well. I wanted to get the message out there so people understood the risks, and that all began only 3 weeks after Jordan's death, when I went back to LinkedIn, a platform I knew well, and in some way, as a release to get some anger out, I shared my story as an article, and partially in the hope as well that if I explained how awful this situation was that we were going through, that it might just resonate with somebody who was thinking of taking their own life, and it might just cause them to go, let me just step back from this. And although it was a naive thought, and I recognize that it doesn't work quite as easily as that, it did in fact work, because I did get many messages from people who said, I've read your article and I just can't do this to my family, and thank you for sharing it. And the article, as far as LinkedIn is concerned, went viral. I had people like Ariana Huffington from the Huff Post emailing me, and lots of people. And I think, although I knew I had a voice on that platform, I suddenly realized that potentially I had a new voice, and that people, if they could resonate with what I'd written there, that perhaps if I shared more of the story, and that might in turn help me spread a message. And that message became fairly clear within a number of months when I started talking with a number of people, really, about what do I do in terms of suicide prevention? What do I need to know? So I was reading books during this time, through the whole sort of January to probably late summer of 2020, through that COVID period, watching videos, listening to podcasts, connecting and engaging with people around suicide prevention, not least the many people that had reached out to me as a result of some of those early articles and posts. And it became very clear that I wasn't going to set up a charity that was going to be a helpline, or they were there, they were already there. I didn't want to just go out and do fundraising or anything like that. I wanted to know what were the practical things that needed to be done. And as I started to learn more about the zero suicide community globally, and the society, and the practical solutions that could be put in place in our community, schools and workplaces and our healthcare systems, that kind of appealed to me because I had a business background. That kind of made sense. What can we do in a practical way? So the Jordan Legacy, its mission has always been to help us move towards a zero suicide society. That term often gets some pushback, but it's an evidence-based concept that comes out of Detroit and the healthcare system through the Henry Ford healthcare system there in the early 2000s. But it, by our definition, is a society that is willing and able to do all it can to prevent all preventable suicides. And the argument is that if we don't aspire to zero, what do we aspire to? Because anything less than that is surely suggesting, that we're going to set limitations and restrictions on that. So that's where that comes from. We recognize, and the research will support, that most suicides are preventable, but not all suicides. And that's a really important message, because for anyone who's lost someone to suicide like me, to be told that all suicides are preventable, you start looking at yourself. You go, well, so what did I do wrong there? So I think we've got to be very, very conscious of that message and how that is delivered. So our work is to, and as we've done so far, engage with government departments, with other charities, with campaigners, with people working in local authorities, within businesses, schools and communities, to have the conversation. So I deliver a lot of talks on this subject, but also to collaborate and work in partnership. And one of our missions really moving forward from autumn of 2024 is recognizing that we've had 16 years now of suicide numbers flatlining at best and increasing at worst. And now with the latest Samaritans report that came out a few months ago, we now know we've seen a 6% increase in suicides during 2022 and 2023. That's 5% for men and 8% for women. So something's not working. National suicide prevention strategies are not delivering the significant downturn that we need to see. So one of our major focuses going forward is how can we bring all these incredible people together that are doing marvelous work in pockets around the country? How do we bring us all together to share that knowledge and experience? Let go of the egos sometimes that hold us back, I think, as a community. How can we all come together to really make that massive macro difference that needs to happen, so that we don't see a figure of 6,000 plus deaths by suicide every year in this country, that we do steadily start to see coming down to 5 and 4 and moving closer towards 0. So this is very much our focus. And just one final point on that, Marianne, a lot of this thinking came from an action research project and report that the Jordan Legacy published in 2023, which we put together in collaborative partnership with Paul Vittles, who now has his own moving a new CIC called Towards Zero Suicide. And that was considered a groundbreaking report by a number of suicide prevention leads in the country. And we asked two fundamental questions of dozens of people. Do you believe we can significantly reduce the numbers of suicides in the UK? And if the answer to that question was yes, how far do you think we can go? And we looked at all aspects of society and community and workplaces. And essentially what that report did was map out what life would be like if we were living in a zero suicide society. So it's on the basis of that report that we're now moving forward to look at how we can strengthen collaboration in the UK.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. You obviously really know your stuff, but you're also contributing to the data yourself as part of the Jordan Legacy. And, just I hope it really achieves and strives for its goals. And thinking about that word ego, I'm thinking about myself as a mental health professional. I just want to say to you as a father, every time I hear of somebody's suicide, I'm gutted. Absolutely gutted. I've spent years in theory and in practice working with people to strive for this Zero Suicide Alliance. But also, I'm sure, as you have recently had people saying to you, if it wasn't for you, I would have ended my life. And I've heard that on a number of occasions, but it almost begins to make you feel slightly powerful and magical for this ability to make a difference. And so when I and my colleagues, I think I speak for us, hear of these suicides, honestly, I cry. Like, if only there'd been a chance for somebody to work with that person. But what we also know is that people do end their lives when they are in active therapy and active treatment, but they also end their lives before they engage with treatment, or the shame of engaging with treatment feels too much, or the one that is just honestly on a waiting list with no intervention. That still really, really gets me, because one of the things I was doing when I was working with the NHS was assessing pretty much most of the people in the service. So I was holding these stories. They weren't just names for me. They were people, with families, with lives, with goals, with hopes, with dreams, but also then seeing them on a waiting list. That was really, really, really hard, really hard. And wanting to create a modern service where actually you get treatment at the point where you need it, and that there's a zero wait list service, which is what I'd been used to when I worked in a CAMS service, which I know sounds radical, but we were working in what was called a choice and partnership approach model at the time. So it was all closely calibrated and job related, that somebody would come along, and if they had a need for treatment, they'd leave the clinic with an appointment, their next appointment. But it seemed pretty much impossible to replicate that in an adult service. which destroyed me really, because that's how I wanted to be able to work. Because people matter, lives matter, and I know there's some rather grisly research that suggests what's lost to society from a suicide, that it's actually there's a monetary value based on what that person would have spent, how they would have populated, how they would have, earned, how the taxing would have happened. There's a big loss to society, to the world, with each and every suicide.
This is something I recently, earlier this year, delivered a TED talk at Bristol University, and it was one of the points that I raised, and I know it does sound crass, because we're talking, as you say, about lives and lost opportunities and loved ones, but this is what frustrates me sometimes about the lack of investment in suicide prevention. Because when Samaritans brought out their report a few months ago, where they estimated that each death by suicide had a cost to the UK economy of £1.45 million. There was the initial cost of death and all that's involved there, the inquests, of course, and other legal aspects of that. There's the therapy and support, of course, for those that are left behind, and ongoing support for them. But there is this loss of earning, depending on the life expectancy of that individual, that's calibrated to be an average of £1.45 million. So if you take the total number of deaths in the UK at over 6,000 to suicide, that's what's reported, you're looking at a staggering £10 billion in cost to the UK economy. Surely it makes sense to invest that money up front, in just the same way as it makes sense from a physical health point of view to have a preventative program in place to stop people being ill. But we just don't seem to get either of those right in society at all. But it just seems a no-brainer to a layman like me.
It really does. Like, it's just simple economics, really.
Absolutely. Totally agree.
So how do we, if we've got that 6 billion, then oh, here goes, Steve. Here's 6 billion. How are
No,
we going to
it's
spend it?
10 billion.
10 billion. Sorry, I've shortchanged you. I've kept 4 billion under my desk, but
No,
okay,
we'll
you've
take
rumbled
this.
me.
We'll take the 6 billion, though, because
Okay.
we're not getting that,
Well, I'm
are
going to
we?
give it you
So,
all. Here you go. Here's the other 4. So I'm giving you all 10 billion. What are we
yeah.
doing with it?
Yeah. What are we doing with it, or what should we be doing with it?
What do we do with it? If we've got 10 billion now, how do we create this gold standard, get it right first time? It might be a service, it might be, just something that takes you from the first realization that I'm having thoughts life isn't that enjoyable, to then beginning to live a full, active, enjoyable life.
When we published our report in July of 2023, we took the 84 pages of that report that Paul and I had worked on, and we thought, how do we condense this visually? And we created this jigsaw puzzle, if you like, where all the pieces slot together, and they were all the aspects of suicide prevention that, if practical solutions were implemented and they all came together, would make that difference. And this is what we were told by all those people that we interviewed and spoke with, many of them with lived experience. And it's a combination of factors that we need to invest in listening more to those with lived experience and get their involvement and viewpoints. That's really important. We need to look at national suicide prevention strategies that don't prioritize just certain target groups, but recognize that everyone is a priority for someone. We need to have active suicide prevention in our workplaces, in our schools, our education systems, in our health systems. We definitely need a suicide prevention educated and activated public. But then if you look at the infrastructures around our societies and communities, we lobbied through a petition to have a national suicide prevention office, a central office independent of government and the Department of Health in place, where local regional partnerships would filter into that national suicide prevention office. We need more safe and supported spaces in our communities, more community-centered support. And one of the things that you've mentioned there with your CAMS experience, Marianne, is appropriate and accessible mental health services. We need support for people who've experienced trauma and loss, for those with long-term physical illnesses and chronic pain who are at risk of suicide. We need to invest more in our tech, those things that can help identify when somebody is at risk or provide support when they are. And we need to look at our infrastructures, our buildings, our railways, all the environments where people choose to end their own lives, and invest in better protection there. I mean, the list goes on. That 10 billion can be spent very quickly when you just consider some of those things.
But some really wonderful places to start in spending that 10 billion. Yeah, the idea of making it harder, you know, monitoring our railway bridges better, having better sensors, having more awareness, maybe even having more, I'm aware that I've got a friend who used to be a travel policeman. That's not the right word, is it? You know what I
British
mean?
Transport Police, was it?
Yeah, like they just
Yeah.
scrapped it all. Like in my locality, there's no one who will chase after you if they see someone recklessly driving. Like that's not a thing
Mm.
anymore because they're not out and about. It's more that you get called to a site of disturbance, but there's less. No, this isn't an anti-police movement at all. But there's just less. There's less presence, and are we all quite scared to talk to people and intervene? And I don't know if you're familiar with one of my friends and colleagues, Dr. Tara Quinn Chirillo, but in the locality where she works, she's got a project called the Conversation Starter Project that she actually started during lockdown, which is in Horsham Park, and literally you get together, you go along and you go for a walk and you have conversations with strangers. But of course, over time, those strangers become friends, and it's facilitated by a qualified counselling psychologist. But it's not therapy. But what we know is that when we feel like we're part of something and we've got a function and a purpose, that can be so powerful.
Yeah, very much so. And again, one of our visions for this fairly ambitious collaborative initiative that we're putting together at the moment is that we recognize that there are so many people working in suicide prevention in the third sector, not non-professional, if you like, that are doing this alone. You know, people like myself. You know, people think because of the presence that we have online and the work that we've done over the last 4 years that we're some massive organization. When they're here, there's like two or three of us. You know, they're shocked. I even had a call from someone recently, or a message that said, you know, we'd love to come up and visit your foundation. I said, well, you can come and have a cup of tea in my kitchen if you want, because that's who we are, you know. But there are many like me, you know, that are working quite isolated very often, you know, doing the best they can to make a difference. But being part of something bigger than that, I believe, is a way of helping people like myself and others to feel they're part of a community and not just working tirelessly from home to try and make a difference on specific campaigns or projects.
Absolutely. And I know from following you on socials that your daughter now works for the Jordan Legacy as well.
Yeah, it's been a really important step, I think, for both of us. Now 3 years, it'll be coming up to that she started working with us, and having been a teaching assistant before, no experience of social media or working in a business environment like this. And she looks after and does an incredible job with everything that we do online and looking after elements of our website as well. And although she shies away from the limelight, even though I'm trying to push her in certain directions now, you know, she does this wonderful job. And then every so often, she will write a post of her own, very heartfelt post, beautifully written, which resonates with so many people, and embarrassingly outshines mine quite easily when she writes them, which is wonderful to see. And you know, I think one of the things we've both found about this work is, and people have asked me a question quite often, you know, how easy or difficult is it to do what you do? And it's a conversation I had with Danielle very recently. You said, how are you finding this? Because of course she's sharing images of her brother, sharing stories of her brother. All the conversations are really about her brother, whatever it is that we do, and she's felt that loss like we all have. And she said, I don't know. She said, I suppose when I'm working on the Jordan legacy, anything I do there, it's like work. It's like a project and a separate box that I put this into, and it's very much what I've had to do as well. I know there are times where I speak on podcasts. Kind of got through today fine, or deliver talks where there will always be a wobble and a moment because you're talking about something so personal at times and your mind can't help but go there. But I think that's important as well, because I think the day you lose that connection with why you're doing this, and that does happen with some charitable organizations, I think that's the time you step away, because you become too disassociated with what's happened. So I think for both of us, yeah, working together is great. We work remotely. She's about 80 miles away from me, so she doesn't have to put up with me physically every day. Does a great job, and we both are able to have our private moments and reflection about Jordan. But when we come to each day, we're able to sort of crack on and do what we need to do. So I think in some ways it's, I wouldn't necessarily call it a therapy, but for me, I think it has helped enormously to throw myself into this. And by talking about it as much as I do, I think it's helped me to process some of that grief as well.
Yeah, I think what you're nicely demonstrating there is kind of externalizing yourself and externalizing Jordan from this. It's about him and it's about people who find themselves in a situation that he was in, so that we can prevent people finding themselves in a situation that you're in. But it's yeah, it's almost like a separate thing. It's not about you and your grief anymore. It's kind of it's morphed beyond that. And the podcast episode just before this one was about how to progress your career when you're grieving. And both myself and my podcast guest were in tears at points during that, because it's so raw. And sometimes you will get more of the authentic person showing up as they're talking about that. But I guess you've managed to progress your career whilst grieving. It's okay to do that, isn't it? It's okay to make money, to have earnings whilst still grieving. The two are not not mutually exclusive, if we say.
Yeah, and I'm really glad you've brought that up, because as you asked earlier before we came on air, I do this 100% of the time now. So I had a career where I was a consultant running my own business and earning quite a nice income and a salary, and I stopped. I wasn't at retirement age yet at that stage. No real plans for retirement. I had an exit strategy looking ahead several years for the business, but I needed to earn an income. And so, I'm very open about the fact that this is a business, really. It's a community interest company, but to all intents and purposes, a limited company. And although most of the income will come through the talks that I deliver and donations, that is invested in us to do the work that we do. We don't have a building. We don't have a direct service that we provide, but it is invested in us working the hours that we do every single day to do the work and that I've described today. And I think we shouldn't shy away from that. We're doing a job that as important as any other job that's out there at the moment, and we have a roof over our heads that needs to be paid for, despite the fact that certainly the income from this job is nowhere near the income it was from the previous one.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's some of the stuff I come up against with kind of providing services for aspiring psychologists as well. People are like, well, shouldn't it be free? And it's like, well, be amazing if it was, but my mortgage isn't free. And, Tesco don't give me groceries for doing what I do. I'm passionate about doing what I do and doing it well, but I also do need to live.
Yeah, it's really important, and I think a lot of people get that. It's very rare I've ever come across an issue with that, but it is important. Yeah, at the end of the day, if all the Marks and Spencers and Tesco's of the world said we think you're doing a wonderful job, have all your clothes and groceries for free, then we would do it for free. And the local car dealership said, "Oh, and here's a car." and Jet 2 said, here's a holiday. Well, absolutely, we would do it all for free, but
I mean,
actually
that's what happens to the influencers, but the influencers still charge high fees, so they're getting it all free, and they're getting the big bucks. That would be the real deal.
Absolutely.
As you were speaking earlier, I was thinking about hope, and hope can feel tricky because what I know that you've spoken about, I think we're looking at Jordan's Gate. We might think a bit about Jordan's Gate shortly. Was you saw a young man who looked at peace and seemed more content and more hope-filled, and for you as a parent, you were like, oh, this is good, but what we know clinically in services is that almost when somebody has come up slightly from depression and kind of crippling anxiety, they almost become slightly riskier, actually, because it's a fact, isn't it? And that's horrendous, because that felt really good for you as a parent, but it was kind of at that point where he was suicidal, and you didn't necessarily know, and that's incredibly powerful as a parent, but also for anyone listening to this.
Yeah, I mean, you're referring, and you referenced Jordan's Gate, and it's what's become a fairly iconic photograph to many people. When Jordan, his stepmother, and I took a walk not long after he's first been diagnosed with clinical anxiety and depression. We took a walk, and in the countryside local to where we lived, we came across this gate. Jordan just sat on the top of this gate, was looking up at the sky, big smile on his face. I thought, well, there's a photograph. First time we'd seen him smile in ages. Little did we know that would become almost a poster for Jordan. Yeah, told you to be a moment. Always is. But it has, and because little did we know that it wasn't until after his death that we read journals that Jordan had written that we found in the attic of his home, that only a matter of probably a couple of weeks prior to that date, he'd written in his journal that he'd been researching methods of suicide for the first time. So, you just have got to be so careful. And I think the message that you're putting across there is that when we talk about spotting the signs that someone might be suicidal, automatically people will look at the depressive signs, the signs of worry, fear. And when someone's suddenly, their spirits are uplifted and they seem to be in a better place, that's the time everyone breathes a sigh of relief. But we also know clinically that this can be a moment where the person has found peace with their decision to end their own life. And because of that, they have a way out. And naturally, as a result, all the stresses and worries and the anxiety and the pressure that they have will be alleviated, and their mood will change. So I think it's a really important sign that if you've seen any change in behavior in someone, where they've had a period of depression and suddenly become very upbeat and seem to have it all together, and it's maybe a quite a rapid change, but you see this change in behavior, that's not the time to sit back. That's the time just to keep the focus, keep having the conversations, and checking in to make sure they're okay, or even to say, look, I've noticed this sudden change in behavior. You seem really, really well. What's brought that on, and try and get to the bottom of that if possible.
Absolutely. And I feel like we could talk for a week and still not do this justice. But what's next for Jordan's legacy?
Well, we have, say, two real areas of focus. One I've alluded to before is a fairly significant vision and plan to strengthen collaboration between those of us that work in the suicide prevention space nationally. Been having a number of close-knit conversations with people, sharing kind of thoughts, and been doing quite a bit of research into how do we create such a community, because I think if I mention people collaborating in suicide, there'll be many who say, well, you're not the first to have come up with this idea. But what I wanted to understand was, what makes real communities and networks work well globally in different settings, maybe to suicide prevention. What are some of the reasons why maybe some of those that have tried to go before haven't worked and remained sustainable. So been doing a lot of research around that, and now have a framework of a plan that we're going to start communicating very soon within the next few weeks, and start extending invitations out to those that I know, like, and trust, if you like, within my network, who would be interested in exploring this further, because I think we need to do something different. And I do believe that strength in numbers, we're stronger together, something you said earlier, is really important. And when I shared this with Danielle, we had a conversation recently. I said, well, what do you think about this? I said, we've got a choice here. She said, well, you've got a choice, Dad. You can either put that to one side and just carry on delivering talks and doing stuff fairly local, which will make a difference. That'd be great. Or you've got this bigger aspiration that will terrify you and us, probably. But if you don't give it a go, how are you going to feel in 5-10 years time? And she said, if it doesn't work, or doesn't achieve what you hoped it's going to achieve, it will still be better than having done nothing. And at least we've given it a shot. And I think that's what life is sometimes, isn't it? It's about giving it your best shot for the right reasons. And sometimes you're going to win, and sometimes you're going to get a silver or a bronze medal.
Yeah. Yeah.
Analogy there, given the games are very, very recent at the time of recording of,
Yeah,
of
but you've
this.
got to give yourself permission to do it as well.
Yeah, I think it's very easy to go, for imposter syndrome to kick in, isn't it? And go, well, who am I to think that I could pull this off? But again, coming back to the Olympics and some of the interviews, from this summer, of people that shouldn't have been there for all kinds of reasons, or didn't believe they could be there, and then came away with medals. Some truly inspiring stories. They could have gone, many of them with mental health issues, could have gone, I'm not well enough to take part, and step back, and yet they showed up and came away, with medals. So I think we need to be inspired by what we've seen this summer in Paris by so many of our athletes as well.
Yeah, but I'm also aware that we've had 2 relatively high-profile suicides by sports professionals or ex-sports professionals over this summer period as well, and I'm also aware that this episode is coming out very close to World Suicide Prevention Day, but this isn't a conversation for just one day, is it? This is something that needs to be woven into the fabric of everything, like you said, like from real grassroots levels, nurseries, early years education, primary. And I've been a school governor for a couple of years as well during my career, and pastoral care is getting so much better. And the episode that's coming, I think, after this one is about by the founder of Daddy Blackbird, and there's a really, really powerful animation that's been created by Caroline's daughter, actually, that's in the episode, talking about actually how harmful and hurtful the word suicide can be used if used as a joke or if used as a colloquialism, and that we need to be aware of the power of that, but also that it can be evocative, but we need to be able to have those conversations in a compassionate, helpful way, and be prepared to have those conversations, not just on one day every year.
Yeah, and I think it's really important. You, again, coming back to something you said there, Marianne, about woven into the kind of the fabric of our society, and there are different ways to do that. People like Andy, Mike, and Tim, who we know well, the three dads, have said that their campaign to have suicide prevention on the school's curriculum is about age appropriate training. I remember being invited out last year in October to deliver talks through the Department of Education in Gibraltar, and I was delivering talks to year 12 and 13s where we talked about suicide, and then I suddenly found myself talking to 5 and 6 year olds. That hadn't been in the plan beforehand, by the way. And on the plane, hurriedly putting something together for that talk, once I got the email about 4 o'clock that morning. But we were able to talk about being kind, and how do you feel when someone isn't kind to you, and so we were able to have a conversation around similar issues, but just using different language. So there is a way to deal with the issue at hand in age appropriate ways, but we need to start early. We need to start dealing with young people's emotions early in life, so we're not trying to rescue them when they're drowning in the river. To paraphrase the famous Desmond Tutu quote, we need to
Mhm.
go upstream and find out why they're falling in the first place and look after them at that point to stop them falling into the river.
Absolutely, and I'm currently wearing a patch on my face, and part of me is thinking, "Oh, maybe I should write, 'You can talk to me about suicide' on my patch so that people know." But, I'm also remembering that when I'm 43 now, and when I was in sixth form, I was in year 12, I was part of the magazine. We'd founded a magazine, and on one of the front page, I think, of our second episode, second edition, if you like, I'd written a feature about teen suicide, and I got my mate to pose with some pills on a desk, and, like, I was having these conversations. I might see if I can dig it out to put it in the YouTube episode, but I'm still banging on about this stuff over 20 years later, but we need to keep banging on about this, don't we?
Yeah, it's really important. World Suicide Prevention Day is an important reminder for everyone. I think these days are really important. They do have a significance and relevance. Um, but it's important to recognize that kind of every day should be World Suicide Prevention Day, as well. And I would look to any company or school or community organization out there who may be thinking of doing something for World Suicide Prevention Day or during this month, and say, are you just doing it for this day and this week and this month? What are your plans once September's finished? And I think that's a really important message to get across.
Yeah, and it's safe to use the word suicide. It's safe to talk about it. You're not going to give somebody an idea, because if that's not something that they are considering, they will be they will be taken aback with that, and that's not something that you're giving them as an idea. But being able to have that conversation in a way that feels safe might just be the difference that makes a difference.
Oh, without question, we know from so many people who've been asked that question: Are you considering suicide, or are you thinking about ending your own life? That invariably it's been the question they've been hoping someone would ask them, and it's come as a huge relief and release for them to be able to answer
Mhm.
that question. It's a myth that it will plant the seed in someone's mind, as you rightly say, and it's so important. You're more likely to save a life than lose
Mhm.
one by asking that question.
Absolutely. Where can our audience learn more about you and about the Jordan legacy?
I think the website is two places, I suppose. The website and by connecting or following with me on LinkedIn, where I'll share a lot of fresh, regular content and thoughts there. The website is thejordanlegacy.com. You'll find our mission and our strategy and all about us and Jordan's story on there, as well. So that'll give you a real feel for the work we do, I should say. But also, if anyone would like to support our work, we've got a menu there that says supporting us, and you can see our fundraisers, what other people have done, from running marathons to climbing mountains, doing all kinds of things to support us. And without that support, we wouldn't be able to continue doing the work that we do. So whenever anyone makes a donation to us or does anything, they're often surprised when they get an email from me the same day just saying, look, really appreciate uh, this. It means a lot to us because
Mhm.
it does.
Absolutely, and that was gonna be my next question, but I will make sure that it's on, all the show notes and in the emails, related to this as well. Thank you so much for your time, Steve.
Marianne, thank you for inviting me. Really enjoyed the conversation and yeah, appreciate the invitation.
Thank you so much. Oh, what an absolute privilege it was to speak to Steve. We had some time both before and after the recording, and we kind of got, plans to stay in touch and to think about how we can continue this conversation. Please, if you do feel moved by what we've been discussing, do consider donating to the Jordan Legacy so that their work can be furthered to aim and strive for the zero suicide stats. That would be just incredible. If you are listening or watching this because you have lost somebody or you're worried about somebody, then I'm so sorry to hear that you find yourself in that position. If you're watching this because you are considering that life might not be worth living, please do make an appointment with your GP, or if you feel like you can't keep yourself safe, please do make contact with emergency services, because what we know is that the emergency services are not just for broken bones. They are for kind of places of safety and emergency assessment for people who cannot feel that they can keep themselves safe. Please know that hope is possible, and that the right services, the right treatment can lead to you having a richly enjoyable life. And if you're listening or watching this because you've lost somebody you love, then I'm so sorry to hear that. Please look after yourself, ask people for support, ask people for care. And yeah, you can follow me on social media. I'm Dr. Marianne Trent. Please do follow Steve Phillips on LinkedIn too. Please let me know what you think to this episode by coming along to the free Facebook group, which is the Aspiring Psychologist Community with Dr. Marianne Trent. And if you are grieving, you might find my book, The Grief Collective, useful. Thank you so much for your time in listening or watching this episode. If you're watching on YouTube, please do subscribe. Please do like, share, and comment. If you're listening on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts, please do rate and review. Thank you so much for being part of my world, and I will look forward to bringing you the next episode, which will be available from Saturday at 10 a.m. on YouTube and from 6 a.m. on Mondays, wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you.